Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Regional Services Committee meeting for Wednesday, November 27th, 2019. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize this meeting is taking place on the traditional, pardon me, I have a cold today, traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. And with that, we'll get underway. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda?
None.
With that, I'll ask for an approval of the agenda. Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Smith. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Adoption of minutes. We have, sorry, Ms. Legault.
The adoption of the minutes of the Regional Services Committee meeting of November 27th, 2019.
If there are no changes or omissions, if I can get a motion to approve the minutes. Moved by Director Smith, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. No business arising from minutes. Moving into public input period. Good day, sir. I don't have to tell you the rules because you know them. Skate up against the edge of them as much as you can. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I am Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake and a member, director of the Shawnigan Basin Society, and also a member of the Shawnigan Research Group. And we work with the Shawnigan School, the Shawnigan Residents Association, and just about everyone, even the CVRD. Mr. Chair, on the minutes of today's meeting is the Shawnigan Basin Society report, including our 5-year budget. The Shawnigan Basin Society has a village meeting place, which just happens to be our office, and much, much more. We have a clay model of Shawnigan watershed there, environmentally sensitive area maps, records, PowerPoint, projector, computer.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
I'm just going to clarify. The agenda, the minutes have been passed. They're not really an item on the agenda today. So you're giving public input on an item that's already passed on the agenda.
Yes, but I'm just bringing you up to date, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so just for future, I will clarify that in the future, minutes are not items on our agenda. They're from a past agenda.
From what I understand from
We'll clarify the policy for the future.
From what I understand from the previous mayor of Duncan, he says that's fair game. So
We'll clarify the policy for the next input period, but please go ahead.
thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So there, as I said, we have a clay model of the Shawnigan watershed, environmental sensitive area maps, PowerPoint, projector, etc. And we have, above all, knowledgeable professionals who can help people solve their water problems or direct them to responsible government department. We have a donated, stunning, one-of-a-kind Douglas fir old growth 21-foot table. It is live edge. It was built locally by skilled tradesmen and the Malahat Nation. The Malahat Nation has blessed the table and put on a feast for all using the table as a place to meet and to feast together. We have had a member of the Malahat Nation work with us at the Shawnigan Basin Society. Working together gives us the opportunity to support and cooperate with each other. The Shawnigan Basin Society talks on various subjects every third Tuesday of the month. It was nice to see a First Nations representative, Patricia Dawn, at our last meeting. She now lives in Shawnigan Lake and hopes to be regular at the Shawnigan Basin Society meetings. For our involvement with protecting their watershed, Josh Handyside, administrator of the Malahat Nation, praised the Shawnigan Basin Society and research team at the last Shawnigan Residents Association General Meeting.
Got about 15 seconds.
The Shawnigan Basin Society has a letter of support from the Malahat Nation. Our Shawnigan Basin Society president has supported the Malahat Nation annual fundraising golf tournament on his own dime. Mr. Chair, throwing our table out would be like throwing away a totem pole. It's sacred. Please support the funding for the Shawnigan Basin Society so we can carry on the protection of our watershed, and the surrounding area watershed. We all need to work together.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no one else stepping to the microphone for public input, we will move on. We move to delegations. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The delegation, item D1, John Horn, Executive Director, Cowichan Housing Association, regarding the Cowichan Housing Association's activities to date and the implementation of the Regional Housing Service.
Welcome, Mr. Horn.
Okay. Chairman Stone, directors, thanks for making time for me today.
Thank you. Welcome.
As you mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Cowichan Housing Association. I have with me Gail Calderwood, co-chair of the Board of Directors, and Patricia Gray, a member of the Board of Directors as well. So they'll be available when we finish talking to answer some questions, etc. So what I'll do is I'll get our PowerPoint up here for you.
So for clarity, would you like questions held till the end?
You can ask questions at any point, but I have allowed for at the end for some
Okay,
questions.
thank you.
If I can work your computer correctly, we'll be in business. All right, very good. So just to give you a bit of a brief overview, the purpose of our visit today is to give you an update on the Regional Housing Service, and that's really the point of this. So I'll go through a little bit of a history, if you don't mind, on that. We just have to make it change slides. Okay, let's try that. So just as a refresher, of course, the referendum question is the one at the top there, which was passed last year in October, I think, of 2018. And that referendum question led to the establishment of the Bylaw 4201, which is the enabling legislation for the Regional Housing Service. And I think that was adopted, I think, in April of 2019, Bylaw 4201. And so that's the bylaw from which the Regional Housing Service arrives. And I'll just start to give you a brief overview of the Regional Housing Service. So there's three components to it. You have the CVRD Housing Trust Fund. The Housing Service generates about $765,000 a year annually. Of that, $500,000 annually goes to the CVRD Housing Trust Fund. There's three parts to that. I'll explain that a bit more later, but there's the Project Development Funding and the Rental Capital Contribution Fund and the Emergency Contingency Fund. Secondly, the Regional Housing Service provides support to Cowichan Housing Association to deliver a series of services, including planning, research, housing development, housing loss prevention. I'll touch more on those. And then there's the management and administration of the Cowichan Housing Association itself. So those are the activities, the three domains that are supported by the Regional Housing Service. The Housing Trust Fund, this is the bulk of the allocation, the bulk of the money that comes each year. And it's $500,000, but I would note that in 2019, that is minus the amount of the dollars for the cost of the referendum. I think that was about $108,000. So for this time, it's not quite $500,000, it's a little bit less. So as you can see, the Project Development Fund component of that, which is 13%, that's money that we use to assist proponents who want to move forward with affordable housing projects, but need some development work in order to get there. Typically, that'll be pre-development work, so that'll be people who have an idea but haven't got a very clear idea yet, and they need to work through to get more clear on who they want to house. Or it can be more technical in nature, assistance for land surveys or stage one environmental assessments and various pieces of engineering reports, etc., that need to happen. And so that's aimed really at the pre-development work before you're ready to go off and get a building permit and development permit, etc. That's $65,000 annually. The second component to that fund is the capital contribution, and that's the bulk of the money. That's really aimed, 85% of the Housing Trust Fund is aimed at rental housing, capital contributions to rental housing. And so that's really, as it sounds, we make recommendations to yourselves as to allocations to folks who are putting up rental housing projects. Then there's an emergency contingency fund. That's really aimed at natural disasters, emergencies. There's still some work to do in defining that, but those are the three components of the fund. So just to clarify, of course, that as far as the trust fund goes, the Couch and Housing Association would be making recommendations to the CVRD board, and you guys would have the final say on any allocations from the Housing Trust Fund. So that's retained within CVRD control. The functions that we perform, so $500,000 of that levy goes towards the Housing Trust Fund. $250,000 roughly goes to service our administration and management, and for us to provide certain functions. These four you can see before you. We have our project development assistance, and that's coupled with the project development funding. In other words, we provide technical support to agencies who want to move forward on affordable housing but don't quite have all their ducks lined up. We work with groups from the very beginning of the process where they have an idea about the need for affordable housing, right through the process till they're at the building permit application stage. But generally, our project development assistance as in our service is really for those folks who are working at the beginning of the process. And they're just contemplating, we want to put up affordable housing, but we don't really know how to make the application for funding or how you do that exactly, and our role is to help them do that. We have a research and information component as well. That covers a fair bit of ground, that one. We do a number of things. Let's see. For example, we have a database that we're developing, so anyone who makes an application for affordable housing has to make that application to a senior level of government, and in their application they have to back up their case that they're making with relevant data. So you have to have a needs and demand analysis when you make a submission to BC Housing. We're going to be providing the data for groups so they can make good applications, so they can back up their asks to the provincial and federal government. So that's part of what that information hub's going to do, is allow proponents to put in good quality proposals. We also look at the strategy. We'll be updating the strategy on a regular basis, the Attainable Housing Strategy. We have a best practices component on that, so we're looking at best practices around North America. Innovative ideas, it's sort of the magpie approach. If we see something bright and shiny over there, we'll steal it and bring it back to Cowichan Valley for our use. So that best practices piece, we're hoping to crank up with some innovative practices and new approaches to affordable housing. And we've been looking all over the world for good practices that way and bringing them home. We have strategic planning, community outreach, building capacity. Some of the groups that do want to put up housing don't really have the capacity to manage a development of that nature and size, so we help them build that capacity. Sometimes in a community, there needs to be entities created or capacity built to provide certain types of housing, so we'll be doing all that along the way and helping local groups to get the capacity to manage, operate, build affordable housing projects. We do housing loss prevention within that. We leverage that quite nicely. We get federal dollars to do that as well. So that's part of that service that we provide, the housing loss prevention service. And we look to leverage that as much as possible for other funds. I would also say that you'll notice on the right-hand side of that slide, there is the Attainable Housing Strategy. So the Cowichan Housing Association received support from the CVRD. Thank you very much for creating that strategy. And that's now adopted and finished. It was launched in April of this year. But also in April of this year, they hired myself to be the executive director. And it marks, if you will, a turning point for the organization, because up till now, the organization had produced a study and done an attainable housing strategy with the community and delivered on those documents. But we felt it was time for the agency to move into a place where we're now moving away from studies and strategies to let's put up affordable housing. So when they approached me to be the executive director, I was comfortably ensconced as the city planner for the city of Nanaimo, the social planner. Had been there for 13 years, a very rewarding and an interesting job. And what drew me here was the fact that the commitment of the citizens, the residents of this community, to address affordable housing was so clear from this regional housing service that I felt I really had to be a part of that. And thanks for having me, by the way. So I'm pleased to be here to do that, and I think that what we want to do as an agency is start to look to really be effective in bringing affordable housing into the community. And while we can't fund that ourselves, and we can't fund that out of the dollars made available through the regional housing service, buildings are too expensive for that. Our goal is really to maximize the investment of your federal and provincial governments into this community in both affordable and attainable housing, and to work with the development sector really to enhance the amount of development that's taking place that does that too. So let's see. Yeah, the way we're going to do this, by the way, we have two committees that we've created. Part of our obligation to you as the recipients of funding from the taxpayers is to make sure that we're accountable and transparent in how we do our work. So we have two committees that we've created to form that function for us, two structures. The Allocations Committee does what it says on the can. It essentially reviews applications and requests for funding, for the project development funding, or for capital dollars for rental housing. And then we, as the Cowichan Housing Association, receive a recommendation from that committee, and that's a committee based on the public and from various parts of the community. They make a recommendation to us, and we make a recommendation to you around allocations. So that's a fair, transparent, and open process. The second committee, which is the Community Advisory Committee, we held a meeting of that committee yesterday. Folks may have been, some of them here who were in attendance. And that committee is really there to guide and advise the Cowichan Housing Association on the delivery and the implementation of the Regional Housing Service. So that committee is a way for the feedback of the community to make its way into our ears and for us to be able to respond to the needs of the community in a really appropriate way and in a timely way. So those are the ways that we ensure that the Regional Housing Service is being delivered both accountably and in a transparent way, and then it's an open process. People can come and be part of those committees and be part of that decision-making and part of providing that advice to us. I would say, by the way, that what we have done to date is we've made the process for applying for money is completed. So we are now ready for applications to be received for both project development funding and rental housing capital contributions. And to share that with the community on October the 4th, which is next Wednesday, at 1 o'clock, we'll be holding an information session.
Sorry, it said October.
Sorry, December the 4th. So on December the 4th at 1 o'clock in the Coxsala Room in the Community Center. That's going to be an information session. We've invited everyone who's an organization in the community to come and hear more about how you make an application for funding through the Regional Housing Service. We've put ads in the paper. I think there was one last Friday, and we'll see one again this Friday. We're inviting the community to come as well. Certainly any members of this committee would be welcome. And that'll be a time in which we give much more detailed understanding of what does the application process look like to ask for capital, and what does it look like to ask for project development assistance. So anyone's welcome to that, October the 4th, December the 4th, 1 o'clock at the Coxsala Room in the Cowichan Community Center. So those two committees are up and running. The process for asking for money is in place, the application forms, that's all on our website as well. We're inviting proponents to come forward with applications, and we're ready to roll out with those funds to incentivize and create affordable housing throughout the community. So lastly, I would just say that our focus is on getting projects up and built. As I say, we're at a transition point. We have a strategy. We have a lot of research documents. We have all sorts of studies that have been done. I think really what the community is looking for from us is to build affordable housing in as many places as much as possible. And that's really where we're heading. I bring up one project which is closest to construction, which is, I'm sure, Chairman Stone is familiar with, which is the Ladysmith Resource Center Association. That's probably breaking ground in the next couple of months. I'm not sure the exact date. But we're in dialogue with a number of proponents throughout the community, from one end to the other, all of them heading towards that same stage of waiting to break ground, and they're all at various stages. So it does take a while, as you know, to build buildings, to get development permits, to put up building permit applications. All that's a lengthy process. We know how that goes. It usually takes a couple of years to get from an idea to an actual building. And in my experience, that can be as little as 2 or 3 years if you're moving fast, and as long as 10 years if it's a lengthy, slow process. So building buildings takes time, but we anticipate moving forward a number of projects over the next couple of years, and we hope to have some applications before BC Housing from this community for the next round of funding, which will be in March. So we're thinking that we have a couple of projects that are ready to make those applications and will be in the lineup, so to speak, for potential funding come in the March call for proposals from BC Housing. So I think that's just a quick overview of where we're at, what stage we're at, the Regional Housing Service itself, and maybe I might ask my co-chair of the board, Gail, to add a remark.
Hi. So on behalf of the board, I'd really like to thank all of you for supporting this service. It's a huge project that we've taken on, but we really believe we're up to the task, and we're looking forward to, as BC Housing rolls out its calls, to maximize that investment that John's been talking about. We're building partnerships, we're bringing people together, throughout the community to make this happen. It's not just us. So we have to coordinate the whole community to make all of this happen. And as we go forward, we look forward to your support, and we will just build. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
So that's
Do-
really
I
just
do-
an overview, and certainly any questions would be.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a bit of a speakers list. I have Directors Acton, Sebring, Wilson, and Yanni DiNardo. So Director Acton to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Horn, for coming in today. Oddly enough, your name came up yesterday. I met with the Easter Seals Camp, so they're
Okay.
interested in partnering with you, so you will hear from them shortly.
Okay.
And I will tell them about your meeting on December 4th, 1 PM. Can you just repeat a little bit
In the
more about
Coke-
it? Because I
Yeah,
didn't get
so
it all
in the
down.
Coke-Sala room of the Cowichan Community Center,
Yeah, and
and,
what
yeah.
will the main topic
the
be
main topic will be
exactly?
how do you make applications for funding?
Okay,
So there's
that's
the two
important to them.
streams for capital or for project assistance. By the way, we've invited our colleagues from the Van City Foundation to come along as well, because they have money available too, right?
Excellent.
So they'll be there to provide information. They've been in this community for a while. They have an office here and everything. But there'll be both of us there to talk about how you ask for money from both of us.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll get that to them.
Thank you. Director Sebring.
Sorry, just a question on the slide about the two different committees. I appreciate the Community Advisory Committee and the invite to sit there. I'm going to discuss that with my council and perhaps send somebody else. Not that I was uncomfortable yesterday. I quite enjoyed the meeting, but we like to spread that around a little bit. My question goes to the Housing Trust Fund Allocations Committee. How is the membership on that committee determined and who's on it?
Right now, we have about 5 members on there, and so what we looked for was particular expertise. We've asked a general contractor from the community who's familiar with the economics of construction to come and sit and review applications. We've asked folks who are city planners, former city planners for the in this area to come and sit, because they know and understand the local government processes. So that's really the goal. We have a member of the nonprofit community at the table as well, to speak from the social services side. So when we receive applications, we wanted to have a good deal of informed, if you will, skepticism when we look at applications for funding, so they can challenge the numbers, they can ask about the target populations, about the principles of how these folks are moving forward. We wanted to have a fairly robust review process, so by the time I made it here for a recommendation, it had been thoroughly kicked around, so to speak, so it would stand up to scrutiny. And that's also important for BC Housing a little later down the road if they're coming for project assistance. We want them to have a strong case going forward, and we think we might be the first stop. So we built it up on the basis of expertise and bringing those specific pieces of expertise to the table to review applications.
Thank you. Perfect.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Horn. That was interesting. I did go to the CAC meeting yesterday, and I learned an awful lot. And it's well known that I was never a great fan of the CHA proposal right from the very start. But I must admit that I've changed my mind quite considerably over the just by attending that one meeting. And there were some interesting points that came up yesterday. In particular, the John Howard Society and the partnership with them. And one of the things that came up was the difficulty that landlords have with their tenants. And if you can forward that idea of partnering with John Howard, where they actually rent the house or rent the space on behalf of the tenant and can control that, then I would really like to see that go ahead, because it's going to open up a whole new area of renters. And one of the other things that I found interesting was the planners saying, well, if you want a tiny house, don't call it a tiny house, call it a carriage house. Or, that way, apparently that's what we were told, that it might get a little bit more. But no, thank you for that. I do appreciate what you said yesterday, and I'm coming around.
All right, thanks. I'll just clarify for the members here is that what the John Howard Society does is sometimes renters who have trouble maintaining a tenancy is because they're pretty tough to rent to. And what we've discovered in other communities is that you can burn out your willing landlords. So in the current environment, when you have a low vacancy rate, landlords can really select who they wish. And what happens is the kind of, some of the folks we try to house are at the bottom of the list of, that's my desirable rental guy. So what we've done is, in other areas, is we've gone into negotiations with landlords where a nonprofit society holds the lease on an apartment. And then if the tenant moves into that apartment and causes a difficulty enough that they shouldn't be there anymore, then the nonprofit society can remove that tenant because they're under a program agreement with that tenant, not a landlord-tenant relationship. It's the society that has the landlord-tenant relationship with the renter, with the rentee. So they can evict someone from that property within a day, you know, and they try not to because that's not what their goal is, but they understand that it's a fragile ecosystem out there in terms of what's available for us in rental apartments. So you need to maintain the willingness of those landlords to rent to folks who are maybe not on the top of their list. So they do that mechanism where they'll take someone out of that apartment right away, address the issues, pay the rent. So the landlord comes away thinking, well, my rent's always going to get paid. We even have a repair fund that we establish so that if the tenant does damage, then we hire ex-John Howard clients to go and fix the damage. So landlords begin to feel like that there's the lower risk in renting to someone who's a nonprofit society who's going to put people into that apartment. And that's one of the ways we hold stock in the community, is by taking the risk away from the landlord, reducing the amount of exposure they have to unanticipated costs or trouble in the building that they have to go sort out. And most small-scale landlords aren't social workers. They really don't want to go sort those things out. So that's the role we play, and it's allowed us to maintain a stock of rental housing in the community that we have access to. And so that's the program Director Wilson was referring to and that we might look at here. So
Thank you. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Horn. Thank you so much for your presentation. And I'd also want to compliment you on your helping out the Cowichan Bay Seniors Group. So you and I have been meeting quite often with a small group in different homes in Cowichan Bay because they're very keen on seeing something happen in Cowichan Bay, and I think this board is quite familiar with it over the last few years. So I'd like to thank you for your interest in supporting them because it's been really valuable.
thank you.
Thank you. Director Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Horn. Thank you for catching us up, and I'm really thrilled that we're here and that you've got 10, and I get the image of the bingo thing that my grandmother used to do, and I used to call the bingo for all our old friends, and they're bouncing around in there, and I hope that some of your 10 will be some of the hundreds that make the next PIA funding.
Yeah.
And I absolutely have no doubt that the existence of your organization is the reason that could come true, so may it be. So, and I realized earlier, I think my question, because you're really only focusing on rental housing, and so I'll just put it out there if you have some thoughts. In the last 7 years, I've met probably half a dozen people who are really keen on ownership through a co-op where they share land and it's a lot cheaper to buy. And I'm wondering if you could ask your board if you might be willing to be just the list keeper of that. So that if we got, because I'm very interested in finding a group and looking at rezoning land in North Cowichan for that purpose. But so anyway.
It is interesting. There's a number of groups who have come to my attention over the years that have that very intention, where they would like to get together, and there's even a term for it. I forget what they call it now, silver something, but there's a certain cohort of the community who've decided that social isolation is one of the potential outcomes if they remain in their big old single-family homes on their 5-acre lots, and they want to come together in a more community-minded sort of way to live in a more communal way.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of emphasis for a chunk of the community on doing that. And
I do too, and I'm just
and I
not
think
sure how to get them
it's
together.
kind of a novel approach, and so we'd be happy, I'm sure, can discuss with my board the option of taking on a list of folks who then could come together and contemplate a joint development, if you will, of something. Yeah.
Great, and thank you to your boards and both your committees and all of the bodies that I know are working really hard to do this and have really been working since, I don't know what year Regional Affordable Housing Directorate started, probably Gail knows, but
Probably.
about 2010 or something.
Yeah.
Everything
Okay.
works so slowly, but thank
We're
you.
getting into a conversation now. But that's all excellent points. I do still have quite a speakers list, Director Smith, Kuhn, McGonigal, and then back to Yanni DiNardo.
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Horn, for coming today. The Couch and Housing Association, my area voted against the referendum. We live in a small area. We already have, through our zoning, opportunities for additional housing, affordable housing, and I also have islands that have a different, because they're under island trust. So it brings forward a few more complications for my area. One of the things, I attended at least 2 of the open houses, and I find myself questioning the 500,000 we were advised would be used as leverage for the pot of gold under the provincial government or federal government for affordable housing. And I see today that we're working towards a different direction than what was advised during those meetings. And I think that that's going to throw a bit of a wrench in the communities who felt that the 500,000 was going to be used as leverage. So that was one of my concerns.
So
And-
if that's a question through to
Yes,
Mr. Horn,
so
if
I
we
was
could
just wondering how we.
because that, from my understanding, that's not necessarily an accurate characterization of the program. Some of that funding will be used to leverage other grants.
Yes, absolutely, because it's not enough to build anything really, $500,000.
It
So
was to be used as leverage.
Yes,
that-
so if you would let
yeah.
Mr. Horn
So
respond, thank
can you
you.
just explain that, please?
Sure. So the way it works is when a proponent goes forward to BC Housing or to CMHC with a project proposal, they'll be asking for a capital allocation from those groups of, let's say, an order of $5 to $10 to $20 million. And when they go, there's a scoring mechanism that happens at BC Housing and at CMHC. And they look through your proposal and they score it based on, what is the urgency of the need, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the big scoring components is who else is at the table bringing assets to this development. So one thing they always look for is someone got a piece of land here that they are making available for this application. If you don't have a piece of land, then you don't get that score. The second scoring thing that happens is there other partners at the table contributing money? And they don't score on how much money is being contributed, but they want other partners at the table contributing. So when we go on an application, we commit to a rental housing contribution, then they go forward to BC Housing or to the federal government, depending on the program, and say, look, we have other funding partners at the table, and they add 10 points to your score. I'm making that number up, but they add to your score because you have another partner at the table who's contributing money. And it doesn't have to be a large amount. It's enough to kind of make a little tiny difference in most pro formas, right? But it's really the fact that you're at the table with dollars. So that leveraging is exactly what we intend to do with that money. Folks come and ask us for a contribution to their capital projects, then they can go forward to BC Housing with, we have partners at the table who are making a contribution. Would you give us the lion's share of the cost of this building? And
So
that's how we anticipate.
And
going
as by
forward.
way of an example, you used the Ladysmith project there, that 36 unit was $300,000 in land value contributions, $75,000 in project development funds came out of it. So for example, in this case, we had a fundraising opportunity to come up with the $75,000 to do all the architecture, demolition of the previous building, et cetera. But those are the opportunities, that $75,000 that could be leveraged into what is now, I think it was announced as $7.5 million from BC Housing. And before they'll release that sort of first capital pool to start the work, they want that land and then the commitment of the project development funds to do all the pre-planning, zoning approvals and so on. So that's where that leveraging comes from. Yeah,
So it
follow
is,
up.
yeah, it is
Yeah.
our intent to use it as leverage because it's not enough to build really very much of anything, so.
Yeah, not even a duplex
Yeah,
per
the
year.
$500,000
So,
doesn't
yeah.
buy a
Follow up?
duplex, right?
Yep.
So just looking at the Housing Trust Fund, am I missing something in those 3 allocations that would be exactly what we just finished talking about? Because there's rental, and then there's 65,000 for the development project and 10,000 for emergency. So which one of those funds would be used as leverage?
Well, both the Project Development Fund and the Rental Housing Capital Contribution. So with the Project Development Fund, what it does is, at the very early stages, BC Housing and Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation will both make available to proponents project development assistance. That's because it's very costly to go get things like building permit documents or even rezoning applications where you need technical surveys. So there's a lot of expenses associated with the pre-development work, which are funded by both provincial and federal sources. But what they don't do is they typically don't fund at the early stages of the development process, where a group's really wrestling with what are we trying to do, what can we do on this piece of land, and our money is going to allow them to get to a stage, this is the project development funding, where they now can stand in front of BC Housing or CMHC to say, we actually need $300,000 in technical dollars in this project assistance money, so we can conduct the surveys and do the studies and get the architects and get the consultants. It's all very expensive before you get to the building permit application stage. That's the stage where we want them to land with enough information to ask for money from BC Housing or from CMHC to really head down the road of, you know, technical drawings and that sort of way. So we get them to the place where they can go get more money, that's the project development assistance. The Rental Housing Capital Fund gets laid on with their ask for the capital from the province.
Thank you. Follow-up?
One more follow-up. I do apologize. Would it not be better to have more than 65,000 in that development fund as opposed to 85% in the rental? That would be able to move those other projects along quicker?
So,
Based on that?
Yeah, and just to pass that through to you, but to be clear, when we talk about rental, that's leveraging dollars to build rental housing projects, right?
Yeah.
That's not like yeah, it's not a rent subsidy. That's like
Sorry,
if
yeah,
somebody wanted to
yeah.
build a 50-unit rental apartment
Yes.
complex for affordable housing, that would be, you know, they need $175,000 to make that a reality in matching funds. That's the pool that would pull from.
Yeah,
But
for capital
go ahead.
construction.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just a because
Yeah,
I would say
possibly.
when we talk about like project development funds, similar, but in a different context when we're actually dealing with BC Housing on that Ladysmith project. So, and there's, you know, I think you guys know because we work through these projects together, there's fear and uncertainty because BC Housing's now sort of saying, oh, well, we want you to sign over, leverage over this piece of assets that you already own, like land,
Yeah.
before they'll release funding and everybody gets nervous. But yeah, that's definitely how this funding is intended to help.
Yeah, so it's not for the faint of heart development, of course, but what I would say about the proportions was that's what we proposed when we came to you originally with the Let's Have a Regional Housing Service proposal. And what we're going to look at over the next year or two is the uptake on those streams. And if we need to adjust, if we need to put more money into project development assistance, then we can do that. I think we'll come back to you and inform you of that. But that's not set in stone. It's the way we're starting the housing service. And what we really want to do is we think that the capital piece is probably the biggest contribution. So we put the bulk of it there because we really want to get projects up and out of the ground. So, but it's certainly amenable to both input and responsiveness in terms of changing that. And we'll see what kind of applications come in for project development assistance. So, and if it turns out that there's not enough money there, then we might rebalance that.
Thank you, John. And just because really the measure is how many units are we building,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I have Director Kuhn and then McGonigal.
I was very much against this function, and I voted against it, and so did my residents. And the reason we did was because we had the impression that all the money would end up down in the center. And I mentioned that yesterday at your meeting, and you basically kind of confirmed that that's probably what's going to happen. And I appreciate the bulk of the population is down there. But I sure hope that we out in the West, we're going to get some benefit out of that as well.
Yes, when I took the role, I think one of the things I had a discussion with the board of directors was the regional approach to this work. And coming from a place that was a municipality that had one entity, I thought it was, what drew me here partly was the notion that there's a range of communities here with a range of needs. And certainly the areas in the West, have been on my radar for quite a bit, and I think that when I spoke earlier, well, when I spoke yesterday, what I was really trying to convey was you need to put, if you put density anywhere, it needs to have services, water and sewer. So there are those constraints that, that are realistic constraints for development. But it also, I think that, I think people should be able to stay in their own community as a basic principle. So if you're born and raised in Lake Cowichan, that's where you should be able to stay. So I would hope to be able to provide opportunities for folks to remain in their communities as far as practically possible. And I think really I just wanted to convey some practical considerations around that. But certainly for the Lake Cowichan area, there's potential for development way within them, both those communities, Yubu and Lake Cowichan. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I do have a couple of new speakers on the list and a couple of repeat speakers. So I'm just going to go through the new speakers. So Director McGonigal and then Director Nicholson, and then back to Director Yanity, DiNardo, and Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, if I may. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I am from the town of Lake Cowichan, and my question is, with the new entity of the Cowichan Habitat for Humanities function that's going, has there been collaborative discussions with Habitat on possibilities of moving forward?
Yes, there has. We've met with them a couple of times, and we're meeting this afternoon at 2 o'clock, as a matter of fact. And Habitat has expressed an interest in participating in this work and looking at how they might be innovative. They have a very traditional conservative model, which was to home ownership and single-family homes. But over the years, they have begun to shift nationally and internationally about how they do that work, and they're sort of open to more innovation. So we're looking to partner with them on some projects, and they would like to see, some of the workforce housing options and that sort of way addressed. Habitat's willing and wanting to be part of the work, and we're now working on what would that exactly look like. So. But yes, that's definitely a partnership we'd be keen to pursue, and they're keen to pursue that with us. So I think there's a marriage in the offing, but we're just not sure what the terms of the dowry will be.
Just courting right now.
Yeah, we're courting this, right?
Director McGonigal, follow.
Excellent. If you need a dinner date, I'm willing to provide a facility. I think that's exciting news when we see the units that are currently being built by Habitat within our community. I think that is the concrete, if you'll pardon the expression, sticks and mortar that people have broached this function with. And I think we also play a role as policymakers on providing opportunities for development, whether we look at, and I've discussed this before, rental-only zonings and new developments, et cetera, and some other alternatives that other jurisdictions are looking at to provide affordable rental opportunities. So I look forward to those discussions when they come forward.
Thank you. Director Nicholson?
Thanks, John. I'm really interested in the outcomes, and I like the strategic plan. And on one page, you have a whole list of performance measures, which I think are great. And I'm just wondering about the challenge of pulling together some of the information, the data for that, and what you think we should anticipate as far as good sort of markers of progress, because I think some of this is not something that's going to happen overnight. So, 5 years, we've got some very ambitious, in your plan, you say in 5 years, and so it's like, what do you think we can expect, and when will you be reporting what?
Right. So as part of our contract with yourselves, we have an annual summary that we'll be providing. We provided one for this budget period, but we were only in operation for a very short period of time, so it doesn't say very much. But annually, you'll be getting a report from us, which really kind of clarifies what we've done, what's been happening in the community, where we're at with various projects. So you'll get that on an annual basis. I would hope to have a much more frequent way of communicating where we're at and what progress we're making. So for our own selves, there's two sets of markers, and one is the reality around the database that we want to develop. So we have a whole host of activities that we're going to be conducting in the next little while around collecting local information that's going to help decision makers. We've engaged with VIU, for example, on a 2-year research project that they're going to undertake on our behalf. We're going to be doing a homeless point-in-time count coming in March in either Duncan or the broader region. We're still working that out. So we'll be doing those sort of data collection stuff, making those sort of things available to the community. So that's one marker, is when we have those Mayville on our website available to folks. We want to be able to do that in the short term because people are making applications now and they need data. So there's that data side of the equation. The second part is the hard side, which is we really want to see buildings going up. Now, that's not entirely within our control because, of course, you have a whole building permit process and all these sort of things. But I would say that one of the things we'd want to mark is how many projects are in the pipeline for funding from BC Housing, how many projects are in the pipeline for building permit applications or development permit applications, and then how many projects are at that shovel-ready stage. And so, because it does take time, it may not be that everything lands as shovel-ready next year, but we want to be able to demonstrate that there are projects moving towards shovel-ready. And I think that would be the main marker for the initial couple of years, is because it's pretty unrealistic to expect shovels to hit the ground. I've been here 8 months, you know. So it will take a while before we really see the shovels breaking ground on the projects that we're starting to work on now. But I would say that if they're in that pipeline and they're heading towards that stage actively and aggressively, that's really the marker going to be for us. So.
Great, thank you. And now I have Directors Yanni DiNardo, Wilson, and Marsh to close.
Oh, thank you. The Cowichan Bay Seniors Community Group that John and I have been working with, I'm just directing this to Director Marsh. It's a cooperative that they want. And Amy Melmock had helped us out and introduced us to Kyle White from Cooperatives First. I did send you the connections with them. But the group in particular in our area is looking for a cooperative. So that is another challenge, but that's something they're very adamant about. And they want to stay in their community. So that's the huge issue with land and that, but just to let you know.
Thank you. Director Wilson, and then Director Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. Horn. It's good stuff you're coming across with there. One of the things that has been happening in another area is the young agrarians, where they've been doing this land matching thing with farmers who can't think. I'm just wondering whether there would be a similar type of arrangement with people who have places to rent and are not sure where to go to. Do you have some kind of program that you can put people who want to rent and people who have places to rent together, or is that something that's planned in the future?
Yeah, we had a discussion yesterday at the Coalition on Homelessness and Affordable Housing, and that was one of the items on the agenda yesterday. So there was a discussion about the lack of rental options, specifically and especially for folks who are coming out of the shelter system or who may have been on the streets for a while. So it's really almost impossible for those folks to find affordable rental. Even when they do, they're not the super desirable tenants either. So that was one of the discussions, is how do we access some more of that private sector rental market? Maybe not in the formal apartment building style, but looking at individual homes who may have secondary suites that they're not renting out, or they live in large homes and could make a space available within. So that's certainly a dialogue that the coalition is having because of the difficulties they're finding in renting. And I think there's been one attempt so far in terms of youth, that there's been a matching program set up where if you have a home and you would like to take in a young person who's no longer in the care of their family, then there's a incentive program and a support program that does that. And I'm sure Michelle could talk more about that, but that's one example of how they're doing it, specifically focused on youth leaving care or youth in care. So that would be something the coalition is keen to pursue. And dialogue began yesterday on what that would look like in terms of a program. And I think we're going to continue that dialogue to see if we can come up with something that does just that. We're aware that you can only build so fast, but you really have to look at what exists in the community now and see if you can get better leverage, so to speak, out of existing assets. So we hope to do that as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And Director Marsh to close.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Horn. I was reminded of a question when you said VIU. What kind of research and what do you know about how many trades are going to be available? Because coming along the pike, we expect a hospital is going to be starting, and there's a lot of private sector money being invested in development in the valley. So do we know if we're going to have the trades? And if not, is there a conversation going on with the high schools for their, I forget what they call it, where you can get
for
a year.
the apprenticeship piece.
The apprenticeship, and
yeah.
then moving on to through VIU and maybe some apprenticeships with some of the local developers?
I'll answer that in two ways, and one is we're keenly aware that the impact on this community of a significant build project like a new hospital or other major infrastructure, for most communities that presents a real challenge when you suddenly have a workforce descending upon you from afar.
Right.
And where are those folks going to live? And in Campbell River, that was a real issue for their hospital build, because similar to here, they don't have a bunch of empty apartments for all the carpenters, plumbers, and electricians to arrive to. So we're cognizant of having to have a response of some kind, because that's going to be coming down the pike at us pretty quick. So there's that. But the VIU piece is the research side of the Vancouver Island University. So the guy we have is a PhD researcher, and his specialty is what he talks about. In America, they call them exurbs. So there's the city centers, which have very traditional sort of makeups. And then you have your rural areas, farm and agricultural. But in between those two, typically in most communities, there's a bit of an edge, which is suburban or ex-suburban, as they call it. And what he's doing is his research career has been studying that edge. Where do people live and how do they live? So what we've asked them to do coming forward to us is to go into the communities that aren't necessarily covered by the major, if you will, institutions that develop data. So I'm going to take CMHC as an example. And they calculate the vacancy rate for communities across the country on every 3 months. So if you're a council and you want to know what your vacancy rate is, and you live in the city of Victoria, you can look it up in the CMHC database. Same with Nanaimo, and same with Duncan. But you can't look up Shawnigan Lake on that database because it's too small a community, and they only really poll the formal apartment buildings anyhow. So if you don't have a lot of those in your community and you have a lot of informal rental, it doesn't capture that. So what we've asked them to do is to come into the community and partnering with us is to look at those areas of the community where data isn't readily available from the traditional sources, and to answer questions that, for example, CMHC doesn't even ask. And one of the things I know about living in a small community, having done this many times myself, is that when a landlord has a multiple of choices about who they rent to, they'll select and they'll not select certain cohorts. So I'll give myself as an example, as a rowdy 25-year-old carpenter showing up at that landlord's door, and he's got a choice between me and my rowdy buddy and the 74-year-old, very sweet-looking little old lady. He's going to take, because young rowdy men aren't the renters of choice, right? So I know that in my own life, I've had to work pretty hard sometimes to get a renter, because, you know, they don't want a young guy, to be honest. So what we're curious about is CMHC doesn't ask the question, who gets left out in a community when there's a scarcity of rentals? Who is it that's really not on the landlord preferred list that doesn't get into those things? And therefore, who should we be considering when we talk about the need for affordable housing in those communities? So those are the kind of questions that I think that we're going to be asking for the more non-urban areas in the Cowichan Valley Regional District. And we want answers to those so we can better understand what do we need to invest in those communities and how we need to invest. So that's the nature of the research we're asking them to do, is give us better information so that we can have that regional approach and be really well informed when we support investments in those communities as to who they're helping. So does that answer your question?
Actually,
Oops, that was an accident. I just knocked your microphone off. I hit the wrong button. No, your button, sorry.
oh, I
there you
thought
go.
you were censoring that.
No, it was an accident.
May I have a follow-up?
I swear,
What-
yes.
What I was thinking, and I'm sorry if I wasn't able to articulate it, how can we ensure that some of our young people can get some of those jobs building some of this housing? Like, can we,
I see,
we partner with the schools and get them trained? Because many of them, if they're still here, they're living maybe with their parents. I mean, there's more young people living
Sort
with
of like a social procurement perspective, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
that-
like how
Gotcha.
can we help
Community.
our
Yeah.
young people get some of these jobs instead of having
I hear you,
people,
yeah.
which will, I would assume, save on housing, because if they're already living here, they have a place to live.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah. I think one of the short answers to that is our work with Habitat for Humanity, that we've very much specified bringing forward people who are in the trades programs in the university to help us in our project, whatever that's going to look like. So I know Habitat does that on a regular basis anyhow. They work closely with the trades department. And so when they come into partnership with us, whatever project we manage to come up together, that's certainly going to be an aspect of that. To the bigger question, when it comes to the hiring practices of the larger entities that are doing your hospitals and things, that's maybe not quite in my bailiwick, but I would say when we're moving forward with affordable housing, what I urge our partners to do, the nonprofit societies, is to really to focus on hiring locally, right? So hiring local tradesmen, hiring local architects and builders. Sometimes that's a capacity issue, but I think it's better to keep the money in the family. And those local people are more likely to draw from those trades programs as well. So we would be urging and supporting, just as a matter of principle, that we keep it local, that we engage the young people in the work in this community. So, you know, I don't have a ton of control over that, but I would certainly be urging folks to take that approach. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just to comment on the procurement around employment around the hospital, the new provincial government guidelines on public projects actually request that there's a certain amount of apprenticeship from local communities through those building projects. So there, you'll see some complaints about that out there, about how it raises costs on capital work like that, but there is some provisions from that in the new provincial government policy as well on big capital projects. I think we're at the end of it. I want to thank you for the wide-ranging and informative discussion, all the work that you've all done so far. I can't wait to see shovels in the ground, but no expectation that you'll have a bunch of stuff built this year. We know it takes a bit of time to get these projects not only off the ground, but built, so. Yeah, next month.
Yeah, next month. Let's go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Chair.
All right, moving on. Ms. Legault.
There are no items of correspondence, so the next item is R1 under reports. Report from the Legislative Services Division on 2020 resolutions to the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities, and the report is for direction.
Thank you. So we've got the report there, Director Marsh.
Oh, look, I had my, never mind. Given that we are looking at director compensation, and we're reading in the paper every month or so about other areas, does the committee want to recommend to the board that we ask the province to get involved and decide a bit about that? I mean, one of the challenges for all of us is it doesn't seem, it just doesn't go down well for, you know, setting your own stipend. And I think it's fair to say, well, given the presentation we've just had and the work on the opioid and everything, that councillors and directors are being asked to do jobs that they weren't being asked to do when originally it was set that you pick your own stipend.
Yeah, I think that's the only thing I think of it is that one, it doesn't hurt to submit it again, but I think we've had it at a couple conferences or something that.
Just Googling it, but I'm sure we have.
So I'm wondering, like, it doesn't hurt to submit it, but sometimes they'll reject it if they say it's duplicated. But I'll go to other members, and that's a good suggestion, though. Director Morrison and then Director Sebring, did you want to get on the list? Okay.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm pretty sure that that's been well debated, and I believe UBCM is actually still working on. You may have more information on that than I, but I also understand that in a conversation with the minister responsible for our realm, that they don't want to go anywhere near that issue, and are hoping that UBCM comes up with a recommended course of action. But more specifically to the item on the agenda today, this is a heads up that regardless of whatever the subject matter that board or council may want to submit to AVICC for the consideration of the members, that it's about the form and content and having good research and backup material and the format in which it's presented. The AVICC is resurrecting an old UBCM program. They've had it in place for a couple of years. I want to call it the Gold Star, but it's for properly formatted and researched and presented resolutions, and this is the preliminary heads up so that committees and the board can think about the pressing items that we want to present at our area association.
Thank you. I believe I have Director Acton and then Director Sebring. Okay, Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I'm always a little, not confused, but this always feels like such a weird, odd forum to have are we having the discussion right now about what we want to bring, or are we deciding how we're gonna do it? Because it always seems like when we're at UBCM, I feel like there's a bit of a missed opportunity, and like, is there another way that we could have a more casual conversation? Maybe this is part of our strategic planning and it works around there, so that we use this opportunity better and we're able to discuss things in a more productive way.
I think the
Yeah.
challenge was just the timing, right? So the strategic planning, really, we will be getting into after the Christmas break, and the deadline for these submissions is the 22nd. So it's just tight timing. I think staff's bringing it forward for direction because of the timing and wanting us to be aware of it. But that doesn't, I don't see us making great resolutions and well-researched policy submissions today. But I think it's maybe that we kind of think about what the issues are we want to look at and then see if we can get them. That's my sort of, I'm getting a bit of nodding around, but that's, you know, if we introduce some ideas and then maybe we can work with staff to get that backup information that would be required. Sorry, I didn't
Could I
hear you
follow
there.
up?
Yes.
So is there maybe even just a kind of lunch that we could workshop kind of thing, spend an hour and a half discussing this in a,
Well, it's
before then?
Yeah, it's the pleasure of the committee, really. If there's
Well-
we do have a couple speakers and maybe
Okay,
there's some, but
anyway,
keep
that's
that in
just a
your bank
question.
and maybe
I
that's
see
a.
people rolling their eyes, so.
No, I don't think, I think, anyway, I'll go through the speakers list and then we can come back around. I have Director Sebring and then Smith.
I'm positive this was dealt with and there was a resolution that we said this to the province, but I'm doing the searchable database at UBCM right now and I can't find it, so I'll pass, but I'm still looking.
Thank you. Director Smith. Compensation.
And the notion that we'd get the province to try to do it for us. It came up on the floor, I know it did.
And Director Smith.
Thank you. Can I ask the chair, we're looking for unique items for our specific area as the Cowichan Valley, or are we looking for electoral area items, or is it a combination that we're looking for? Can you please give me some more clarification on that?
I put that through to the CAO, but the understanding would be that any resolutions that would be coming from the CVRD, so they may be relevant to specific electoral area issues. When we go to the UBCM or AVICC, there's often resolutions that are focused on electoral area issues or otherwise. But if it's if it's just something that is like a policy that would affect one electoral area of a regional district, those usually don't get to the floor because they need to be sort of policy issues that the province would weigh in on. But I'll put it through to Mr. Carruthers for.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think traditionally the topics for potential resolutions would come from either this table, the Regional Services table, or the Electoral Area Services table. There may be electoral area specific issues that those directors want to discuss and bring forward. And so timing is a challenge. You know, if you're going to have a conversation about this, it needs to be done in a meeting, a formal meeting, albeit you may want to separate it as an agenda item from your typical business. But what I would suggest is that directors take this away, have some thought. The next Electoral Area Services Committee, the electoral area directors may want to consider potential topics. We're going to be coming back again as a board on December the 11th, I believe, and there may be an opportunity for the board to provide some direction. It does take time to develop these resolutions, so the earlier that we can consider it and allow staff some time to do the appropriate research and do the appropriate drafting so that we're able to table those resolutions prior to January 22nd would be beneficial, considering the agenda deadlines and that kind of thing. I think the sooner we do that, the better.
Follow up.
Thank you. So would it be appropriate to have a portion of this go to the next EASC meeting for a discussion so it can be put on our agenda so that we can have a discussion there?
I was going to suggest that based on what I had heard that maybe, I don't know if a resolution's required, we'll just make sure it's added to the next EAS agenda, for sure. And that gives all the electoral area directors to think about those specific issues. I think Director Sebring and Nicholson.
I found the resolution, it was from 2018, and it passed that UBCM examine the issue of local government elected official remuneration and establish an independent process to assist local governments in setting fair and equitable remuneration for elected officials. That one was endorsed, so presumably that committee is doing its work. There was another one from Maple Ridge, which was not endorsed, and that goes back a few years earlier, that the UBCM urged the province to include terms of reference for the municipal auditor general, the responsibility of determining reasonable. So there's been some discussion, and presumably there's a committee that's been working since the 2018 convention. So that would be, they would have started this spring and probably going to report back this coming September. So there you go.
Thank you. Director Nicholson.
Oh, thank you. Every year I feel the same way that Director Acton does, is that this is an opportunity and that we're not very strategic about how we approach it. And part of that, I guess, is because we haven't got our strategic priorities established yet. One thing I would suggest is that you touch bases with the Cowichan Watershed Board, because there are some really important initiatives happening that need to be maybe thought through, and how we could perhaps use AVICC to help with. And then I guess my question is maybe to you through to Director Staples. We've got a climate change thing started, and I'm assuming things from that will flow through to AVICC, so we don't need to worry about that specifically. Okay.
Sorry, through to staff? Sorry, through to Director Staples, I mean. You're not staff.
No. So, I just realized that today is the deadline for that. So there will be something going to AVICC. We've been invited to do some sort of form of presentation to update everyone on where that is at AVICC.
Follow up?
Yeah, I guess my specific issue is that I don't think the legislation provides the flexibility or tools to electoral areas to do some of the things we probably will need to do to deal with climate change issues in the future. Of course, trees would be one thing.
And complicated by the realities of, the forestry lands and stuff in our areas as well. And I know we've tried to make sort of work under the Water Sustainability Act even, and then it kind of gets rebuffed by the province when we try and take on some of those responsibilities or get that legislative authority, I guess. But I think the point being is that I think that it's pretty clear that this is a good heads up for us, because we do need to do some work if we plan on putting some resolutions forward. So do the directors feel that this at this time this serves as the heads up, and we can work a little bit, bring stuff to EASC and just have be anticipate in advance that at that meeting specifically that we should take some time to talk about it, that it's not just an agenda item we move on from, but actually expect to set aside some time. We spent an hour almost with Cowichan Housing this morning, so I think in all fairness we can knock out an hour or something at least around these policy pieces and come back with suggestions to that meeting. And I think the municipal partners, we often work through our municipalities on our resolutions, so it may not be as pressing for us because we're already working through those resolution processes at our municipal tables. But I think for the electoral area directors, if you feel comfortable with that next week, I think we can move on to that. Sorry, Director Morrison.
Yeah, just if I can provide a little context here in that there's, after each convention, AVICC convention, there's discussion as to the feedback as to what comes back from members at the event. And one of the things that's become very clear is that people want to be, during the resolution sessions, debating issues that are current and relevant to today's world. And what's been happening over time is poorly crafted resolutions of items that have been discussed numerous times before have been coming forward from local government. So they're asking all local governments to sort of tighten up their focus and their frame of reference for the resolutions, and all the information is in here that if we're going to put something forward, it should be current, relevant. It should affect other organizations. And I would just use the SIA. A couple of years ago, we put forward resolutions through AVICC that ultimately went through to UBCM, and it was because of the context of that sort of activity going on across the province that it gained traction and was endorsed and moved through AVIC and ultimately through UBCM. So I think that this heads up is great, that anybody with ideas that are current and relevant that they want to see addressed, we can have those discussions both at the EA level and at regional services. And I think there's enough time to craft proper resolutions to send forward. Thank you.
So any further discussion on that today, or we can pick up the discussion next week at EAS? Okay, so with that, we'll move on. I believe then we're on to question period. Thank you. Sorry, Ms. Legault, I'm used to doing this all by myself at the municipal table, but question period. We'll see you this evening though, right? Is that late this afternoon?
Oh, definitely.
All right, so we have no one up at the mic for question period, so we'll ask for a motion to go into closed session. Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Klaus Kuhn twice. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. We'll take about 5 minutes.